Welcome to part 3 of lesson 4 heterotrophs in the module 2 organization of living things. In this video, we're going to be focusing on the circulatory system of heterotrophs, and we're going to look at the different structures that occur, but also the way in which the composition of the transport medium changes as it moves through the body. So there are two types of transport systems. On the left we have open, and on the right we have closed. And we can see that all of the fluid and all of the materials that are transported within a closed system stays within the system. Where we see that with the open, it does flow both in and out of the system and leaves the system at some points during the process. So an open circulatory system, it does consist of a heart or a heart-like structure, but it doesn't actually have any blood vessels. And we did look at earlier in part 1, we looked at the tracheoles and the spiracles of insects, and we can see here that they in fact do have what we refer to as an open system. And this is because there's no distinction between the blood and the extracellular fluid. It's all one single fluid that we refer to as hemolymph, and it is in direct contact with the cells, but also it's almost directly in contact with the air through the spiracle. There are two types of closed circulatory systems. We can have a single system, and this occurs in organisms with a two-chambered heart. And this is the example of an organism which has this system are fish gills. We can see, and we've seen previously, that the blood travels from the heart to the gills. In the gills, the blood absorbs oxygen and releases carbon dioxide. And this is aided by the countercurrent flow. It then flows from the gills to the organs and the tissues and the rest of the body, and then back to the heart. And we can see here there's only one circuit. There is, however, a double system in which there are two circuits from the heart, which we as humans have, but also it is the way that birds circulate their blood. And these two circuits, one is where the blood passes from the heart to the lungs, and in this process it absorbs oxygen and releases carbon dioxide before returning to the heart. And then from there, so we have oxygenated blood, it can pass from the hearts to the organs and the tissues in the body before we see the transfer of gases, and then we see deoxygenated blood returning to the heart in that circuit. Unlike the alveoli we have in mammals, birds have microscopic tubules called air capillaries. They don't have a diaphragm but rely on pressure changes in their air sacs to move gas into and out of their respiratory system before it does go through the double circuit. There are also two types of transport systems that then transports this material around the body. We have the cardiovascular system, which we're quite familiar with in terms of transporting blood as the circulatory fluid. However, we do also have the lymphatic system, which is an open system within our body, and this circulates colorless lymph fluid. And the role that it plays is maintaining osmotic and fluid balance, so regulating salt and water within our body and our tissues, but also supporting immune defenses. So the cardiovascular system is the closed system that transports substances via the blood throughout the body. And it ensures that all cells have a ready supply of nutrients and oxygen, but also a way in which it can transport away its metabolic waste out of the body to maintain our balance and make sure everything is functioning correctly. Some of the components of the cardiovascular system, we have our heart, and we have a four-chambered heart, which is a muscular pump with two pumping chambers, our ventricles, which are located at the bottom part of our heart, but also our two receiving chambers, which are our atria. The right side pumps deoxygenated blood, and the left side pumps oxygenated blood. And these work together with our blood vessels, which are a network of our muscular vessels, and this carries blood to and from the heart. Our arteries carry blood away from the heart and under high pressure. Our veins carry blood to the heart under quite a low pressure. And our capillaries are the connection between our arteries and veins. And their thin structure allows gases and nutrients to pass between the capillaries and the body tissues. So here we can see how the structure changes, and we can see the difference in the thickness of the muscular walls and the amount of layers that they have and the thickness of the elastic layer. We can see in the artery that the elastic layer is quite thick in comparison to the vein, and that's because the blood is flowing under high pressure from the heart. And then we can see the capillary, which is just one cell layer thick, and this allows for the movement of gases between that and the body tissues, like we said earlier. So the way in which our capillary works is a few ways. So we see the filtration. Sometimes we see no net movement, but we also see the reabsorption of a lot of our fluids that we require. And it is related to the differences in pressure, and it does require these differences in pressure to see whether we push things outward or whether we see substances trying to push inward. Um, yeah, so these play an important function in that process also. Within our blood, we have a few components. So we see our red blood cells, also known as our erythrocytes, and these make up 40% of our blood volume. They're concave as they lack a nucleus, and they're full of hemoglobin, which binds to oxygen and transport it to the cells. Our white blood cells or our leukocytes are larger in size, but they're also fewer in number, and they can either be phagocytes, which remove debris and fight infections, or lymphocytes, which produce antibodies. And then our final part are our platelets or our thrombocytes, and these contain substances that are important in preventing blood loss and promoting blood clotting. And there, sometimes we see those when we have a cut when it is starting to heal, that little yellow liquid that forms on the top of our skin. So, hemoglobin, which we mentioned a little bit earlier, is a respiratory protein and it contains iron, which is carried in our red blood cells. So, because of this iron, we have four oxygen molecules which are available to combine to each hemoglobin molecule, and this forms oxyhemoglobin. In areas of low oxygen, the oxygen is released from the oxyhemoglobin, but we can see anemia occur when our hemoglobin doesn't actually lack iron. So we have low iron in our blood because the hemoglobin is not able to carry oxygen in these circumstances. So we can see here is a little table of what substance we transport through our body and where they're coming from and where they're going to, the form they're taking and who's carrying them. So we know that we do move carbon dioxide from our body cells to our lungs. These are carried as hydrogen and carbonate ions, and they're carried by our red blood cells. Oxygen, we know we just talked about coming from the lungs to our body cells as oxyhemoglobin in our red blood cells. Water is within our plasma. Salts come from our digestive system as well as our water. It's also transported in the plasma. Our lipids come from our what we eat, and it goes to our body cells, and it's transported by the lymph and the plasma. Our nitrogenous waste comes from our liver, which breaks down our amino acids, and it takes it to our kidneys for excretion. It's carried by the plasma, and then we have a few other things that are also carried by our plasma. So oxygen is important, obviously, for our cells to ensure that we can complete respiration. And we know that the oxygen carrying capacity of the blood is increased by the presence of hemoglobin. Carbon dioxide is a product of respiration, and it must be carried to an external surface for release into the environment. Otherwise, it does and it can form carbonic acid, which causes the pH to decrease. And we know as pH decreases, it causes our blood to become more acidic, which can be quite harmful to us. And a little side note here is the Bohr effect. And this is the way in which oxygen and carbon dioxide have an affinity with hemoglobin. And so we know that as carbon dioxide concentration increases, oxygen actually does not want to bind with the hemoglobin anymore, which means that it moves into the bloodstream, and we see the carbon dioxide combined with the hemoglobin to then be transported out of our body. And the final system and the final slide for today is our lymphatic system. And this consists of our lymph vessels, our lymph nodes, and some of the organs that we know as the thymus and the spleen. The colorless liquid which it transports is called lymph, and it's from the tissues in our body to our heart. It can return any extracellular fluid that leaks out of the capillaries that we looked at earlier, but it also plays a vital role in the immune system in terms of filtering blood and making sure it removes any foreign particles. That concludes part 3 of lesson. There is a lesson 5. There is no video, so it's lots of classwork for you. So thank you for tuning in for module 2, and stick around with the course for module 3.